Good evening, everyone, and welcome. As per the usual format, I've muted everyone, but please feel free to unmute yourselves if you wish to say anything or ask anything. Apologies for the slight delay in starting. So I wanted to look today at the very opening episode of this week's Parsha. I called this shiur the Passion of Pinchas, because Pinchas engages in an act of kanos. It's a difficult word to translate. An act of zealotry, an act of extreme, passionate connection to Hashem. He assesses and sees the disastrous result at the end of last week's Sedra of the sin that is committed with the daughters of Moab. The plague that results as a punishment in this sin, and Pinchas steps forward and kills the prince of Shimon along with his partner in this sin. And in this week's Sedra, Pinchas is praised for so doing, for doing this act of kinah. I've posted on the chats group, for those who haven't seen it, if anyone doesn't have the handout, I've just posted in the chat group the link to the handout. So if anyone hasn't got it, they can download it. But this is the topic for today. Now, looking at the psukim, I printed in the source sheets. I put in the source sheets the first few psukim of the chapter. The opening of the chapter, of course, is still from last week's Sedra, which describes the Jewish people encamping in the desert next to Moab, and they begin sinning with the daughters of Moab. And Moshe is horrified. Hashem is angry with the Jewish people. This is Pasuk Gimel. Now Moshe responds, Vayomer Moshe al Shoftei Yisrael. So Moshe says to the judges of Yisrael, Pasuk 5, Hargu ish anoshov. Each person should kill the people for whom they're responsible. Those who have aligned themselves, who joined themselves, who have attached themselves to the pagan and immoral practice of Baal Pa'or. So at this point, Moshe is responding with the standard normal response one would expect from a leader, which is judges, the court system. When Moshe says to the judges, kill the sinners, in Pasuk K, he means using the normal procedures of Beis Din, presumably. Now, in Pasuk, in the next Pasuk, in Pasuk Vov, it describes how Ish mibnei Yisrael, one of the children of Israel, it says in English, but often Ish means a distinguished person, sinned, and we're later told that this is the Nossi of Shimon. He came and brought a V'hinei Ish mibnei Yisrael bar v'yakrev el echav v'samidyonis le'enei Moshe le'enei kol hadas b'nei Yisrael. He, in a act of defiance, he brings his Moabite partner and sins in front of Moshe and in front of the whole of the Jewish people. And here we get to Pinchas' act. Pasuk Zayin, Vayah Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen. Pinchas, the son of Elazar, the son of Aaron the Kohen, sees this. Vayakom, he gets up mitocha Eida, Vayikach Romach biyodo, and he takes a spear in his hand and he deals with the issue. Now, I'm not going to go into detail into the justification for what Pinchas did. It's a vigilante act, effectively. This is the concept of someone taking the law into their own hands, not waiting for Pasuk Hay, for the court system to deal with it, for the Beis Din to deal with it, but just acting unilaterally. And there's a Gemara that discusses the nature of Pinchas's action. It's the concept of kanoim pogim boy. Certain situations in which a kanoi, someone who feels a sense of sort of a dedication and determination to resolve the matter, can, on a rare occasion, act in a vigilante manner. And clearly, this is a dangerous halacha. Clearly, allowing something like this opens a can of worms. We'll see, in fact, this is a lot of what the opening Parsha of our Sedra revolves around. The fact that Pinchas' action is actually not so black and white, it's not so simple at all, and it needs really Hashem's seal of approval, Hashem's Hechsher stempel, to convince everyone that this is the right thing to have done. A vigilante act is a little bit of a recipe for disaster. It can open up a complete breakdown in law and order, in being law-abiding in any way, and therefore it carries with it danger. It also carries with it, of course, personal danger, and we'll look at this also later, because the victim or the person who's going to be receive the vigilante's act, of course, can defend themselves, and therefore there's danger to the vigilante. Also, it can lead to a complete breakdown of law and order. But either way, what happens here is really a terrible story. It's 40 years on. This is supposedly the new age. This is the next generation. The generation the Meraglim have passed, and something terrible happens. A failure, yet again, of a large part of the Klal Yisrael, and a failure of the leadership also. Moshe doesn't know how to react. Moshe is frozen in his... is frozen, doesn't know how to respond, and Pinchas steps in. We now start our Seder Pasuk Yud. Vaydaber Hashem al Moshe Lemor. Hashem now speaks to Moshe, saying, this is how the Pasuk's normally translated, Pasuk Yud. Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen, Heishiv es Chamasi me'al b'nei Yisrael. He turned away my anger from the children of Israel. Bekano es Kenosi, b'sochom. In that he was zealous or jealous for my sake amongst them. V'lo Kalisias b'nei Yisrael b'Kenosi, and therefore I do not consume the people of Israel in my jealousy or my zealousy. So there's a lot just to unpick in this pasuk itself, and we will do that. First of all, how did he turn away the wrath from the whole Jewish people? How does the act of one person make a difference to that which is meant to happen to everyone else? What does it mean b'soichom, in their midst? Also a little bit of an unclear word. What does b'soichom mean? What does it mean he did it in their midst? I mean, where else did he do it? But this is what the pasuk says. Pasuk Yud Beis says, L'chein emor, therefore say, Hineni noisen lois briti shalom. I'm going to give him my covenant of peace. What is a covenant of peace? Why does Pinchas get it? Why is this an appropriate response to what happened? Again, lots of questions. And finally, Pasuk Yud Gimel, V'hoi soloi ulazara achrov b'ris konas olam, tachas asher kinei lelakovai chapel b'nei Yisrael. He and his descendants should have a bris, a covenant forever, and this is the covenant of Kahuna. Now, the relationship between Pasuk Yud Gimel and Pasuk Yud Beis is a little unclear. Is this a second covenant? Is this the original covenant? Is this identical with Bris Shalom, or is this something else to the Bris Shalom? Again, a little unclear. And again, why is Bris Shalom an appropriate? Why is a Bris of Kahuna, a covenant of priesthood, an appropriate response to Pinchas's act? So these are the questions that I think spring to mind when one learns these psukim. So I really just want to spend a little time learning together some of the Mefarshim on this Parsha and just see what collectively comes out from all of them. And the first source I want to look at in the time available is the Or HaChaim. The Or HaChaim picks up on a nuance of language in Pasuk Yud. This is a more general question, but this is a very common phrase that we're used to reading and perhaps don't stop and think about what it means. Vayedaber Hashem, Pasuk Yud, Pasuk 10, Vayedaber Hashem el Moshe Lemor. Hashem spoke to Moshe, Lemor. So what is this word Lemor that we see so often in Psukim? So often a phrase opens, Vayedaber Hashem el Moshe Lemor. So Rashi, there's two possible meanings of what this phrase might refer to. It may mean, as we often translate it, as saying, in which case it's a semantic equivalent. It's a word that's equivalent of what we would nowadays perhaps use open speech marks for. So Vayedaber Hashem al Moshe, Hashem spoke to Moshe, and what was the content of what he said? Pinchas ben Elazar, open speech marks, and that's the function of the Lemor. And this is often how it's translated. Interestingly, Rashi al-HaTorah generally does not adopt this translation. Rashi normally understands it to mean as Lemor, say to someone else. So Vayedaber Hashem al Moshe, Hashem spoke to Moshe, Lemor, that he should say to others. And the Or HaChaim picks up on this point, and he says, who is the recipient of the Lemor? Who is it that Moshe is meant to speak to over here? I mean, when it's a mitzvah, we understand he's meant to address this to the Jewish people. Who over here is he meant to address it to? Lemor, says the Or HaChaim, tzorich ladas mi yoma. Who is he meant to say this to? Im lePinchas, if it's to Pinchas, lo tzorich lomar achakach. He didn't need to say this. It didn't need to say Lemor, because the pasuk says L'chein Emor. So if we have a look at pasuk Yud Beis, pasuk 12, there Hashem says L'chein Emor. Therefore say Hineni Nosin Loi Es B'si Shalom. I'm going to give him a covenant of peace. So pasuk Yud Aleph ostensibly is an introduction. Hashem says Pinchas ben Elazar did this act of which I approve, which is Heishiv es Chamasi. He turned away my anger, and therefore pasuk Yud Beis L'chein Emor Hineni Nosin Loi Es B'si Shalom. So now go and tell him that I'm giving him the covenant of peace. Again, I posted on the chat group the handout if anyone didn't have a chance to see this, because I'm aware that we're doing a little bit of textual analysis over here. So who is he speaking to? It can't be Pinchas, says the Orach Chaim, because Pinchas is already instructed in the next pasuk that he should tell him. Therefore, he continues in the third line of his commentary. Hashem's intention is that Moshe should say to Yisrael the content of pasuk Yud Aleph, that you should know that Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen, Heishiv es Chamasi, he turns away my anger. V'kavana, and the reason is they should recognize Pinchas' good deed and they shouldn't hate him. In that he killed a prince, etc., and the results of his action. So what the Orach Chaim is saying is that what happens over here, Pinchas' action is a dubious act. It's open to different viewpoints. It's an act of vigilante, as we already said. He exposes himself to danger. He also acts in front of Moshe. Moshe is the leader of the Jewish people, and Pinchas acting in front of Moshe is arguably undermining Moshe's authority. So this is yet another issue over here. He's also killed a prince of Yisrael. He's killed a Nasi Yisrael, and he's done so without using the court system. He's basically played God over here. The role of the court system is referred to as Elohim. It's referred to as Elohim Nitzav B'adas El. It's referred to as the system of justice. It acts in place of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to ubiyata ra mikabecha, to eliminate evil. And it has to follow a system, has to follow guidelines. And here, Pinchas acts alone. So hence, the lema, this is something that the Jewish people need to hear. It needs to be shared with everyone so that they all understand that in this case, there is a divine imprimatur, there's a divine approval of what happened. Rashi also picks up on a similar issue. And this is a very well-known Rashi, which I printed here in source 3. Rashi picks up on the language of Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen in pasuk Yud Aleph, in pasuk 11. It tells us who Pinchas is. Now already in pasuk 7 it told us who Pinchas is. This Pinchas is not an anonymous, unknown figure. In pasuk 7 it already told us that Pinchas is ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen. So why here does the Sedra open again with saying this is for Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen? Says Rashi, because the tribes were disparaging him, saying this is Pinchas, who after all is the son of Elazar HaKohen's wife. Elazar HaKohen's wife is a daughter of Yisro. He is both Pinchas, but he's not just the grandson of Aaron, he's also the nephew of Moshe through his wife. And therefore, they say, look, his own grandfather fattens calves for idolatry, was an Oved of Avodah Zarah, and he ends up killing a Nasi Yisrael. Who does he think he is? And therefore it traces his ancestry back to Aaron to say that he is he is legitimate in what he did. Now again, the intention of this Rashi is a little unclear. What's the point around the idea that Pinchas comes on one side from Aaron and on the other side from Yisro, who is a ger, someone who joins Klal Yisrael? It's not clear exactly what the claim that's being made. It's possible what they're saying is his act of murder comes from his negative ancestry. This isn't a Jewish act. This is an act of someone who's really an outsider to our people. It's tracing the sort of lineage of what leads him to behave in this way to his less good ancestry, as it were. And therefore Hashem's saying, no, look, he's also a product of both sides. It's possible they're saying he's a hypocrite. It's possible they're saying that's what's going on over here. Who does he think he is to act in this manner? He's a hypocrite. He's not someone who himself can hold himself up for being so virtuous. He himself comes from a background which has idolatry in it, and therefore it's an act of hypocrisy. It's possible what they're saying over here is that he's got, the classic newbies syndrome, the joining the club syndrome. There's an old Yiddish expression, a gevorner is erger wie a geborner. Someone who joins is worse than someone who's born into it. Someone who joins and doesn't really feel like an insider often has a point to prove. They sort of overreact. They don't have things in moderation. And therefore, maybe that's what they're saying. They're saying Pinchas is a new boy to the club, and therefore he overreacts because he has to sort of demonstrate his credentials. So this is the different readings of what the message over here to Pinchas is. Now, moving onwards, what is the nature of this bris shalom that is given to Pinchas? What is this covenant of peace? Now, a lot of ink is spilt over this covenant of peace, and we sometimes lose Peshuto Shel Mikra. We sometimes lose the simplest interpretation of what the pasuk is telling us. Who does one make a covenant of peace with? Who does one feel a need to make a covenant of peace with? The simplest pshat is you make a covenant of peace with someone who is a potential enemy. That's who you need to make a covenant of peace with. You make an alliance if there's someone who there's potential for conflict with. And therefore what's going on over here is that there's potential conflict with Pinchas. Pinchas has just acted in a manner which isn't exactly so clear-cut. He may be seen as a potential enemy of the Jewish people. He's going around murdering his own brothers, his own fellow Jewish leaders, and therefore he needs a contract of peace. And the Tosfos takes on this Bashat, explaining the pasuk that we've just read. Heishiv es Chamasi. This is the Tosfos source which I printed underneath in source 2. This is a collection. There are 2 or 3 collections of the thoughts of the Bali Tosfos on the Torah. We're familiar on Gemara. There's Rashi on one side and Tosfos on the other side. The author of Tosfos is the descendants of Rashi, both biological and students, who authored for several hundred years the yeshiva system and the yeshiva world in France and North Germany, came under the inspiration of Rashi. They also wrote various works in the Torah, most of which we don't have, but various collections have been made. The most famous collection is called the Das Zakanim, but there's another less well-known collection called the Hadar Zakanim, and I found this thought in that particular collection. And there the Bali Tosfos say, Heishiv es Chamasi, Ein Yisrael Sonu al Kach. The Jewish people shouldn't hate him for his action, because he did a good act for them. He turns away my anger from them. And if they do hate him, he shouldn't worry about this. Why? Because he did something correct. Therefore it says, because he did something right, therefore it says, I'm going to give him the covenant of peace. He doesn't need to be afraid. He doesn't have to be afraid of the fans, the supporters, the followers, the families of Zimri or Cosby. So according to the Tosfos, this is quite simply the signing of a covenant of peace. And therefore, effectively, it's the collective acceptance between Moshe representing the Jewish people and Pinchas, and they say, truce, battle over. We're not going to have a continued conflict of revenge murders. We're signing a covenant of peace with you, meaning to say, number one, we recognize and appreciate that your action was well meant. You saved the Jewish people. And number 2, even if there's anyone out there who doesn't, we signed a covenant of peace, they're not going to get you. Or perhaps it's a sort of siyata d'shmaya of peace as opposed to a covenant of peace. So this is either Hashem's guarantee or the Jewish people, Moshe representing the Jewish people, saying that we're signing this covenant. So this is the Tosfos' explanation of what's going on over here. There is a very important and interesting Sifano over here, and this addresses the question of 2 questions, really. We're going to look at the Sifano twice. We're first going to look at the Sifano in terms of understanding how Pinchas achieved this atonement for the Jewish people, and we're secondly going to look at the Sifano and understanding what the bris shalom that he received as a result was. So the first question that Sifano is bothered by is, how did Pinchas atone for everyone through his action? And because of the interest of time, maybe I'll just summarize outside the Sifano and the next source which we have printed here, which is the Kli Yakar. And between them, they give several explanations. The question here is, if the people are culpable en masse for this terrible breakdown in morality and reversion to pagan practice, which occurs in the story of Baal Peor, how does Pinchas' unilateral action make a difference? How does one person stepping forward and intervening actually help and do anything? And there's several answers to the question that are given between the Sfana and the Kliyaka. One possible answer is his act jolts everyone awake to the horror, at which point they then do teshuvah and act. So what he's done is an action of awakening everyone. They see what's happened. They're shocked. Why has Pinchas acted in this manner? He's just killed someone. This is awful. This is horrific, and this serves the function of alerting them all to noticing what's going on and realizing that there's something terrible happening. So this is one way, perhaps, of reading the psukim. An alternative explanation is that Pinchas' act simply scares them. They stop sinning because they're scared. There's a kanoi here, there's a zealot around, who knows what he's going to do next, and therefore they stop acting. It's true that in this reading there's no fundamental change or teshuvah process that occurs, but it's at least an action that stops sinning, which after all is the purpose of the justice system. So Pinchas shows that Klal Yisrael have within themselves the resources to deal with it. It should have been the shoftim, the judges, who deal with it. That's Pasuk Hey. For whatever reason, the formal justice system failed. But there's an alternative second system, which is a system of Kanoim Pogenbo, the vigilante, which can deal with it. A third explanation is that Pinchas' action gives Hashem the opportunity to teach the same lesson in a positive way rather than a negative way. In other words, the point is that someone has to have heard the message. The plague starts to indicate that there's extreme divine disapproval. Someone hears it, at least the Pinchas hears it. Now Hashem can respond to Pinchas' action and say, great, you're being awarded with this. You've got the Bris Shalom, you've got the Bris Korona, whatever exactly the reward that Pinchas gets. And therefore, the message is being communicated, and therefore the plague doesn't need to continue because it's being addressed with through this other means. So this is another reading of the pasuk. Finally, the Sifano, and let's just read the lines of the Sifano inside. He says, "Bekanos kanosi b'socham, she'osanik mosi le'enei kulam, kadei she'beroisum zeh v'lo yimchu yechupa al asher lo michu." Sifano says that through them not objecting to what Pinchas did, this demonstrates that they've heard the message. In other words, they've atoned by allowing Pinchas to act and not react. Now, there's two possible ways of understanding this. Either through not reacting, they're demonstrating that they've understood the lesson and they've learned something, and therefore there's actually something positive in their non-reaction. Or their non-reaction initially to Zimri is because they're too passive. They don't see upon themselves having a leadership role. So Zimri does something terrible, they don't react. So at least when Pinchas acts, they also don't react. It shows that this isn't a non-reaction to bad and a tolerance of evil. It's just in general a passivity. They don't have the confidence and the leadership to act, and therefore they don't deserve a punishment for not reacting to the terrible things, because they also don't react when Pinchas does it. They're just in general, they're a little bit apathetic. Apathy is not a good thing, but at least it's not a tolerance of evil. So this is the Sifano's reading of the Psukim. There is a couple of other suggestions put forward by slightly less well-known commentaries over here, who discuss this idea. I'll miss out here in the interest of time in the Meshech Chochmah, but well worth having a look at. A very beautiful Meshech Chochmah on the subject. And I'll just mention the commentary of the Rosh. Again, the Rosh is better known for his halachic works, but he does write a commentary on the Torah, very often a commentary which takes a halachic stance, and therefore he asks something very interesting over here. In a few moments we'll discuss whether Pinchas is a Kohen or not before he's awarded the Bris Korona, but the Rosh, at least initially, takes upon the stance that Pinchas is a Kohen. After all, he's Pinchas ben Elazar and Aaron a Kohen. He's a biological descendant of Aaron, and therefore presumably a Kohen. If he's a Kohen, how can he do this act of killing the Nossi of Shimon? Surely a Kohen has to avoid becoming Tommy Mace, becoming ritually impure to a dead person, and therefore how could he act in this manner? And the Rosh gives a fascinating, intricate, technical halachic answer. He says that Pinchas managed to do this in a manner in which he didn't become Tomei by withdrawing before the death occurred, before the actual patira occurred. This is the comment of the Rosh. But what he's bringing out over here is that there is an additional spiritual risk to Pinchas at work over here. I just want to use the few minutes available, though, to discuss what this bris shalom is and how it links to the bris kahuna. So we already mentioned the reading of the Sfano, who sees this as, in a sense, not a reward, but neutral. This is a protection of Pinchas from the possibility that he will be attacked. All it is Hashem reassuring him and saying, "Don't worry. I'm making a bris shalom with you. I approve of what you did, and more than that, we've signed a covenant of peace. You'll be protected from revenge." Rashi views it differently, and we'll just have a quick look at Rashi here in source 4. I printed in source 4. Rashi says, "As bris shalom, shetahei loy lebris shalom." This should be for him as a bris shalom. Meaning to say, this is like someone who feels appreciation for someone else. This is an expression of Hashem's appreciation to Pinchas for what he did, and therefore Hashem expresses gratitude to him. So what is this bris shalom? It's simply toda rabah. This is something shalom. Shalom. Thank you. I express my appreciation to you. There is, however, a whole separate strand of thought found in the Medrashim and in the Zohar, and in various of the Mefarshim. I printed here, I think, Rabbeinu Bechai in the continuation of source 4, and also a medrash. It's a medrash found in Rus. It's a medrash found in the Zohar. It's a medrash that's cited in a lot of times in Chazal, who link Pinchas with the character of Eliyahu Hanavi. Now, what's the link between Pinchas and Eliyahu Hanavi? So, on one level, the simplest answer is because they display character traits in common. Both of them are famed for their kanoos, for their zealotry for causes, for important causes. We don't have time now to go through the story of Eliyahu, but anyone, if one learns the story of Eliyahu and looks it up in Sefer Melachim, one will see he acts with kanoos. In fact, interestingly, and this is perhaps a topic for another share, we've mentioned a lot of the ideas we've been talking about are the dangers of vigilante act. Eliyahu is criticized by HaKadosh Baruch Hu for his kanoos. It's not such a simple thing that he did it. Right at the very end of the sources, I've printed here the bottom source on page 3. I brought a Medrash Agoda, which we're not going to have time to go through, in which Eliyahu is perhaps criticized by Hashem for his kanoos. So the same midah which achieves greatness for Pinchas achieves greatness for Eliyahu too. Of course, he's an exceptionally great figure, but also some tones of criticism. Either way, the Medrash says Pinchas zu Eliyahu, Pinchas is Eliyahu, and this is something that's often adopted in the Gemara, in which it assumes that Eliyahu is a Kohen, and the Mefarshim explain because Eliyahu is Pinchas. So Rabbeinu Bechai picks up on this, and he says that this is the bris shalom. The bris shalom is that Eliyahu will not die, or at least have an extended life. He says shalom is perhaps a nutricon, is I think it's called a portmanteau, a word which is produced by combining two words together. And he says that shalom means shalolomos, that he's not going to die. Perhaps a more philosophical approach that we can take to this, in order to understand the link between bris shalom and not dying, is a fascinating Sifano, and I'll finish with this source. The Sifano says that death results from an inner conflict. He says death results from us in a sense, ripping ourselves apart. The story of Adam and Chava in Gan Eden, in which death is decreed on humanity, seems to be telling us that Adam and Chava are bifurcated on some level. On the one hand, they're incredibly spiritual beings. We human beings are created b'tselem Elokim. On the other hand, we live our lives not just aware of ourselves being in the image of God, but also aware of ourselves as bodies, as being intensely physical beings. the body, it pulls in a different direction to the soul, and at some stage the conflict is irresolvable. No matter how good and fine and spiritual and moral people we try and make ourselves, we can't achieve our full spirituality while still inhabiting a body. At least initially, the body needs to break down, and then later there's the period of Tchias HaMesim, whatever exactly is the spiritual concept of revival of the dead, and somehow a return to a resolution between this conflict. Says the Sforno that Pinchas in his act, an act of a kanoi, an act of a vigilante like Pinchas, has to be 100% pure. Only someone who has this purity of spirit and this absolute burning sense of what is right and what is wrong can do a act of kanois, and only HaKadosh Baruch Hu can authenticate and validate their action. Doing an act like this is a terribly dangerous act. HaKadosh Baruch Hu looks back on the Pinchas and he says, this was an act which was Lishma. And therefore Pinchas has achieved a state of inner harmony and peace. He's taken that which is potentially lowest in a human being. He's done an act which normally is the most contaminative and terrible act a human can be. An act of murder or killing outside the court system, outside the system of justice, and someone who can descend in a sense so low and elevate such an experience, can do even such a terrible breakdown of behavior, lishma, as an act of sincere kanos. This is someone who's achieved an incredible inner harmony and peace, and it's for this reason that Pinchas is able to go on and have a bris shalom, a covenant of internal peace, which is what allows Pinchas to live forever, to be Eliyahu Hanavi, who, as we know, not only lived a very extended life, he was still around in the time of the kings of Malachim, the generations after David HaMelech, but more than that, according to the Psukim, ascends to heaven alive in some shape or form, and this is achieved as a result of his action of being a kanoi, someone who does a bris shalom. So this is the thought of the Sforno in this, that the translation of bris shalom is that which he's going to live forever. Why? Because he's resolved the conflict that lies at the heart of most of us human beings. So we'll stop there on the Sedra, and we'll use the second half of this year to continue our halachic discussion. Now, we were dealing with the malachas of Kotev, writing on Shabbos, and moichek, erasing on Shabbos. We've dealt quite extensively with Kotev. We haven't dealt with moichek, erasing, and we will deal with that, please God, probably not next week, but the week after that. But we still have probably 2 weeks worth of shiurim to discuss a vast array of drabbanons linked to the malacha d'oraisa, the Torah prohibition of Kotev, of writing. Now, you will remember that when we began Kotev, I said, why is this irrelevant halacha to learn? Who writes on Shabbos? I mean, of course we don't write on Shabbos. And I hope that the last series has made clear to us that there are cases where one can end up thinking about writing on Shabbos or writing on Shabbos without necessarily meaning to, even just an etch, a roshem, an indentation in a page to mark or underline something could be a problem. And then we spoke about various temporary forms of writing, posing for pictures, writing with invisible ink, and these cups that change color, and so on and so forth. But the truth is, the real impact of the malacha of Kotev on us is a vast array of drabbanons connected to this malacha. And this is an area of halacha that is really not very well known and deserves to be discussed. And it's somewhat of a complicated area of halacha also. And the background is as follows. Associated with writing, in Chazal's understanding, is the whole world of a certain type of business and commercial activity. There are all sorts of activities which Chazal saw as leading very easily into risking writing. And included in that are business transactions, mekach or memka, buying and selling on Shabbos, and even giving a gift. Transfer of property is very often associated with writing a contract, writing terms and conditions, and therefore they saw this as something dangerous to do on Shabbos. There's also other things that they saw as dangerous to do on Shabbos as a result of the risk of writing, but those we will probably only get to next week, which is that of weighing and measuring on Shabbos, a whole separate area of halacha. But for now, I'm just going to focus on commercial transactions and the halachas of this Gezeirah Drabonon, the rabbinic decree against doing transactions, commercial transactions, and even non-commercial transactions, gifts, on Shabbos because of a fear that this will lead to Kotev. Now, there are 2 other reasons given in the poskim for why one should not engage on commercial transactions on Shabbos. And the boundaries between what is the primary reason for this Gezerah and secondary reasons for this is a little unclear. So I'm going to first of all explain the other reasons for not doing transactions on Shabbos, and then in a sense merge them all together and just talk about the general halachas of transactions on Shabbos. Now there is a pasuk in the Torah which the Ramban picks up on, and this is a verse which refers to Shabbos as Shabboson. It should be a day of Shabbaton, a day of Sabbath resting. And the Ramban understands from this pasuk that min haTorah d'oraisa, as far as Torah law is concerned, beyond all the malachas, the 39 malachas that we're aware of, is a more generic halacha of ensure that the day is Shabbos atmosphere, ensure that it's Shabbosdik, Shabboson, that it should be a day of Shabbos appropriate activities. And the Ramban says, were it not for this pasuk of Shabboson, we would think that min haTorah, as far as Torah law is concerned, you can still engage in a serious pursuit of weekday activities. I mean, you could do business, you could consult your accountant or your lawyer, you could have your shop open on Shabbos, and as long as you make sure that you don't write anything down, what exactly would be the problem as far as Torah law is concerned? Now, the Ramban is aware that there's a series of derabbanans that stop this taking place. Handing money as mukta. We've already said there's a derabbanan here of kosev, of a fear of writing. But he's saying, as far as Torah law is concerned, is Shabbos just about not doing the 39 malachas? And the Ramban says, no, certainly Shabbos is about a general Shabbos atmosphere, Shabboson. Now, exactly what the parameters of this and how to define this is a little unclear, but the concept that the Ramban is saying is very clear. We sometimes in our minds divide the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. And sometimes that's a legitimate halachic approach. But in this case over here, the Ramban is saying Shabbos isn't just about the letter of the law, it's also about the spirit of Shabbos, and this is a Torah concept. So this is a second reason for not engaging with commerce on Shabbos. And there's a third reason for not engaging in commerce on Shabbos, which is known in halachic literature as Divrei Kabbalah. Now, Divrei Kabbalah does not mean Kabbalistic halacha, it means the words of the Nevi'im. There are various halachas which are taught to us by the prophets, by the Nevi'im, which have a status somewhere between a derabbanon and a deraisa. Perhaps it's a topic for another dedicated shiur, but we often think in very digital terms, when actually analog is the better way of thinking about things. We think very on-off. And in our minds, we have a very discrete boundary. Deraisa is Torah law, derabbanon is rabbinic law. In fact, there's a whole swathe of halachas that demonstrate that this divide is not so accurate. And one example of this is Divrei Kabbalah, prophetic halachas which exist in a uneasy territory between deraisa and derabbanon. Either way, there is a set of very important and beautiful psukim in Yeshaya, in Perek Nun Ches, the 58th chapter of Yeshaya, a set of psukim that describe, amongst other things, what Shabbos is meant to look like. And the psukim say, in Toshiv Mishabbos Raglecha, if you turn your foot away because of Shabbos, and you avoid pursuing your needs, your needs on my holy day, for Karosar Shabbos Onei, you call Shabbos a day of delight. It's something honorable for those who are holy to Hashem. You honor Shabbos by avoid going on your own paths, from pursuing your own business and speaking about it. Then you'll be able to delight to Hashem, and you'll be able to experience what Shabbos is really meant to be. So an analysis of this pasuk, and we're not going to go through this pasuk completely, tells us that there's a number of things that we shouldn't be doing on Shabbos. Toshiv Mishabbos Raglecha, we should be turning our walking away from a certain direction. What direction? Doing our own needs. And Dabe, speaking about things which are not appropriate as Shabbos talk. So we now basically have three halachic issues floating around doing business on Shabbos. Halachic issue number one is the Ramban. What's Shabbosdik activity? You shouldn't engage in business and having your shop open. Halacha number two is the Psukim in Yeshaya, which talk about avoiding on Shabbos, engaging in your own needs, and speaking about your own interests and your material pursuits. And finally, we have a derabbanon of any transaction on Shabbos. Now, the derabbanon goes a lot further than the previous two categories. The Ramban doesn't mean that you can't give a gift to someone else. Quite possibly, the Ramban also doesn't mean that you can't do a one-off sale. So if you're walking on the road and your friend admires your cloak, your coat, and says, "Can I buy it?" Often you say, "Sure, take it. That'll be a tenner." As far as the Ramban is concerned, in Torah law, this probably is not what the Ramban is talking about. The Ramban is talking about leaving your shops open. That's the example he gives. So leaving shops open is a clear conflict to the whole atmosphere of Shabbos. Doing a one-off random sale wouldn't fall under that, but that would probably fall under the Pesukim in Yeshaya of engaging in one's own needs, and certainly would fall under the drabonon of business transactions. So this is just an introduction to this idea to mention there are these three areas of halacha which merge here in this context, and the exact boundaries of which one is which isn't always clear. But either way, we're going to learn the halachas of transactions on Shabbos because this is an important thing to talk about, and it comes under Kotev. It's a drabonon built around a fear of writing and recording these transactions. So very briefly, the headline of the malacha of this gezerah drabonon, is that one shouldn't engage in any transactions, any transfers of ownership, whether a business deal, even if it's only oral, or renting, leasing, and even the giving of gifts. So I am going to modify this and tweak this. We're going to see when this does and doesn't apply. But in principle, before one does a business deal on Shabbos, and before one gives a gift, one needs to switch on one's halachic processing and just think it through a little bit in terms of this discussion that we're going to be having this evening. Because even giving gifts potentially could fall under the rubric of this gezerah drabonon. So let's take the easy scenario. Having a shop open on Shabbos, even if one avoids any other isurim, this is Shabboson. This is the prohibition of non-Shabbos activity, and that's nothing to talk about. If one leaves one's business open on Shabbos, and there are businesses that, for whatever reason, it's technically very difficult to close, and then a detailed rabbinic consultation is needed. But potentially leaving a business open is a chilul Shabbos deraisa of this pasuk of a Torah prohibition of Shabboson. But what else is clear under the drabonon? Even just making a deal. So over the Kiddush talk, in the days when we used to be able to have a Kiddushin, and we weren't needing to isolate them, please God, we will get back to those days. So a Kiddush talk, one hears that someone is planning to sell their house, and a little negotiation over it, and shake hands on the deal. This would be a problem of daber dava, of inappropriate talk on Shabbos, and also this gezerah drabonon, this rabbinical prohibition of any business transactions. Even negotiating a price would be prohibited incidentally under mitzvah chesecha, the daber dava, non-Shabbos talk. Giving gifts, that we'll get to a little later as to what the extent of this prohibition is. Now there are a number of exceptions to this. If this is referring to a Shabbos need, then there are ways of engaging in transactions on Shabbos, and people may remember still where on rare occasions on Shabbos and Yom Tov, grocers or shopkeepers remained open in order to provide supplies, and there are ways of doing business on Shabbos in such a situation. And there's a lengthy biur halacha of the Mishnah Berurah that summarizes this issue, and basically he says that there's three conditions that permit transactions on Shabbos when these are Shabbos needs, when these are needs for Shabbos or Yom Tov. And the three conditions are basically there to avoid this appearing like a regular commercial transaction. Since the source of this prohibition is a drabonon, they were okay with transactions occurring on rare occasions, as long as one reminded oneself and distanced them from looking like a regular business deal. And the three conditions are as follows. The first thing is the language that one uses in terms of the sale itself. One shouldn't talk about buying and selling. The second is the language one uses about payment. One shouldn't refer explicitly, to payment after Shabbos. And the third thing is to do with how one constructs the sale, avoiding using commercial terms like weight or cost. So just going through these one by one. One shouldn't say to the shopkeeper, please can I buy a carton of milk? Please can I buy a dozen eggs? But rather you should say, can I take or can I have? And that way one would avoid the the transaction. Now, I want to reiterate again, we're not talking here in a supermarket where one would need to go and pay and everything else. We're talking about in a setup where there's an arrangement of trust, and therefore one can make this deal without needing to buy or without needing to handle money or the like. There are examples, by the way. Sometimes this whole halacha is irrelevant because it's a genuine and significant medical need, but there are occasions where someone has a medical need which allows one to take medicine on Shabbos, and one's run out of the aspirin and so on, and one can pop into the chemist that we have at the corner of the Crest and Brent Street, and he knows our community and there's a relationship of trust, and one would be able to buy it off him. It's obviously not ideal, one should have made arrangements in advance, and he will accept payment afterwards, and therefore knowing these halachas is relevant. So this is the first point. The second point is one shouldn't explicitly discuss payment, and therefore again one would have to use vague language, and you'll say, I'll make arrangements, I'll settle up after Shabbos, rather than explicitly talking about payment. Now these things appear a little bit of a sort of technical loophole. After all, both sides know that you're talking about payment. What difference does it make what words you use? Isn't this just a sort of legal hair splitting? Harama, what's called harama and halacha, just being deceptive by avoiding use of certain language. And the answer is it's correct. This is, in a sense, just avoiding language. But that's exactly what Chazal wanted to achieve. They knew there were certain cases where it would be necessary to buy and sell for the sake of Shabbos, an emergency situation, one's run out of the supply. And one should just be careful how one does it in order to remind oneself that a real commercial transaction is not allowed because of this gezerah of Kotev. The final halacha is sometimes a little bit harder to determine, which is that one shouldn't refer to what one's buying in terms of potentially weight or price, or even sometimes number. Now, there's two reasons why one refers to number or price or weight. And one can be doing it because, in a sense, this is part of the negotiation of the business deal. So you ask them to weigh out a certain amount of food, and the weight is mentioned because you're being very specific about the amount one's buying. Or similarly, one wants a quantity and price, and one says, give me 15 pounds worth of X, pounds either as a weight or as a value in this context, 15 pounds as a value. The reason one's mentioning the money is because one, in a sense, is part of a negotiation of the terms and conditions of the deal. And in that case, it would be forbidden. If one merely mentions a weight out of convenience because you need to say the quantity you want, then this would be allowed. So again, it would depend on the context. This isn't a blanket rule against mentioning weight. The context is of mentioning weight or number where there's a commercial, a negotiation element to it. So these are the halachas of transactions on Shabbos based upon this prohibition. Now, this is probably very rare, and most of us aren't ever going to be in a situation where we need to buy or sell something on Shabbos. However, giving gifts is more relevant to us. It's very, very common that we give gifts on Shabbos. Someone invites one to their house for Shabbos or for Yom Tov, and you come round with a box of chocolates or a bottle of wine. Indeed, in shul, on the occasions of simchas, I present the bar mitzvah boy or the bas mitzvah girl with my wife gives the bas mitzvah girl a gift of a chumash from the shul. Let's learn the halachas of giving gifts. Now, tzorech mitzvah, I should mention, is not enough to allow a commercial transaction, a business transaction. So maybe I should have mentioned this even before gifts. Tzorech mitzvah in and of in itself, the need of a mitzvah is not enough to allow a business deal. For example, this comes up, someone realizes they've forgotten to sell chometz on Shabbos Erev Pesach. Are they allowed to arrange the sale of chometz on Shabbos? And the answer is no, because one's not allowed to do a business transaction even for a mitzvah. There may be cases where the loss is so significant that there's other workarounds, but in principle, even for a mitzvah, one can't do a business transaction. There's a lot of discussion about shuls that have the custom of selling aliyahs, whether that's allowed on Shabbos. Those that allow it argue that selling an aliyah is not really a sale of a service, it's more a donation to tzedakah, and as a sign of respect, one gets the aliyah. But certainly shuls selling seats on Shabbos Yom Tov wouldn't be allowed, even though this is a mitzvah. Nonetheless, it's a commercial transaction. Those have made a pidyon haben, which falls on Shabbos, will know that we don't do a pidyon haben on Shabbos because of this drabanan. So even a mitzvah one can't sell. I mention this as introducing gifts, because with gifts, tzorech mitzvah is allowed, And this is the basis of giving gifts to a chosen and kala on Shabbos or Yom Tov. It's a mitzvah of simchas chosen and kala, and it's allowed. And it's also the basis of giving a gift to a bar or bas mitzvah, boy or girl. We're giving the gift l'chvoda shel Torah, in honor of Torah. Why are we celebrating? Because they've become bar and bas mitzvah. They've entered into the responsibility of mitzvahs, and there's no greater celebration than that. There's no greater mitzvah than that we are happy and delighted in celebrating that they've become adults in halacha and now have the responsibilities of mitzvahs, and therefore giving a gift for tzorech mitzvahs is allowed. Similarly, giving food to someone who needs food on Shabbos Yom Tov, an act of tzedakah, is allowed, because again, this is a mitzvah. So if your neighbor needs food, giving them the food on Shabbos Yom Tov is certainly not a problem over here. The other example I think of giving gifts on Shabbos and Yom Tov, or Yom Tov actually, is an esrog. So we are aware that the first day of Sukkot one needs to own the Arba Minim, and therefore we all give gifts to each other. We give, if someone doesn't have a lot of an esrog, or perhaps a child doesn't, we'll give them the gift on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Shabbos we don't shake, but on Yom Tov, in order to fulfill the mitzvah. And again, this isn't a problem. So this is gifts on Shabbos and Yom Tov. So transactions, commercial transactions, only for the needs of Shabbos and Yom Tov, and with the conditions, the three conditions about the language one uses, as we discussed, avoiding terms of buying and selling, avoiding the word payment, and avoiding talking about weight or cost in the deal. Gifts allowed l'tzorech mitzvah, allowed in a case of mitzvah, and also allowed in a case of need for Shabbos and Yom Tov. And this actually covers many or most scenarios of giving gifts on Shabbos and Yom Tov. If one comes round to a house and as a guest and one wants to give a gift, generally speaking, the gift one's giving is a tzorech of Shabbos and Yom Tov. It's a box of chocolates, it's a bottle of wine, and therefore it enhances the Yom Tov or the Shabbos, and therefore one's allowed to give the gift. What happens if this genuinely is a gift which isn't tzorech Shabbos or Yom Tov? Then one shouldn't give it. And if one needs to give the gift, then as one hands it over, one should specify that the kinyan is not occurring now. The kinyan will only occur after Shabbos or Yom Tov. Or alternatively, one can have given it on their behalf to someone before Shabbos and Yom Tov. So you can say to your friend, please acquire this before Shabbos and Yom Tov, and then I'll be able to bring it round after kinyan has been done, bring it round to the recipient on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Again, this can sound like a legal loophole. I'm giving them this gift on Shabbos, and I'm saying, yeah, but only acquire it after Shabbos. And also, this is a loophole, but it's an acceptable one, because it's reminding us of this idea that transactions are not allowed on Shabbos and Yom Tov. So we've spoken about gifts, and we've spoken about commercial transactions. I remember now, as I'm talking, the other very common example of all of this is if one ends up eating in, or staying even, in a hotel on Shabbos. I'm not going to go, or Yom Tov, I'm not going to go down to all the halachas of running a hotel on Shabbos and Yom Tov. It's exceptionally complicated for all sorts of reasons. And anyone who has a business, even a business that legitimately can run on Shabbos and Yom Tov, needs very, very detailed and careful analysis with a Rav about how to do so. But from the point of view of the guest, can one help oneself to a drink from the mini bar? Can one order up some food to the room on Shabbos and Yom Tov, based upon this prohibition of transactions? And the answer is, again, based on what we've discussed, one's allowed to do so if one wants to eat it on Shabbos and Yom Tov. So you're feeling a little peckish on Friday night, and you want to order a sandwich, assuming the hotel is kosher and also therefore being run in line with the halachas of Shabbos, and there's no issues with how the sandwich is made. One can order the sandwich on Shabbos, and make sure one keeps the three conditions that we've discussed. So one doesn't tell the reception that one's going to pay for it. One doesn't say buy and sell, and one just lets it all take place by itself. And actually in a hotel, obviously, this is what naturally happens. One doesn't say to the reception, I'd like to buy. You just assume it's there, you'd like to order, and it's understood that it will be added to your account for when it comes to settling up. So these are the examples of buying and giving gifts. In general, small, significant lending and borrowing, commercial lending and borrowing of things which aren't needed on Shabbos is also prohibited. However, again, one's allowed to do so when it's for food and other things which are needed for Shabbos. So one's allowed to borrow some milk from a neighbor or some eggs from a neighbor and pay them back after Shabbos Yom Tov. And the same rules really apply. One shouldn't say, can you lend me and I'll pay you back? Just say, can you give me, or can I borrow, and can I have, and we'll sort out after Shabbos. And that way one avoids again this problem of buying and selling on Yom Tov. Summarize: buying and selling not allowed, giving of gifts even not allowed, lending even not allowed. In all these cases on the commercial level, certainly not allowed. In a case where it's for needs of Shabbos or any of the other situations we've spoken about, then it's allowed to be done with care, as long as it fulfills the conditions, the needs of Shabbos. If it's a gift for any mitzvah, and one watches one's language to ensure that it is distanced from looking like a commercial transaction. So this brings to a close buying and selling gifts on Shabbos. There is another whole area of halacha linked to this. And this again is a very important area of halacha, and one often not fully understood. And this is the aspect of schar Shabbos, receiving payment for things that are done on Shabbos. And we only got a minute left, so I'm not going to really open up this discussion, other than to mention, more than we realize, we receive payment for things that we've done on Shabbos. Work is often done on Shabbos. A babysitter who babysits on Shabbos may receive payment after Shabbos, obviously, for the work they've done on Shabbos. This is a shiur. I work on Shabbos, as do many communal figures. A Rav or a Chazan is employed to work on Shabbos. Many Balei Korah who are paid for their service get payment for work done on Shabbos. This is all under the remit of schar Shabbos, earning money on Shabbos, even when I'm doing something completely permissible, loaning or being a Chazan or a Rav. Nonetheless, there's potential issues with schar Shabbos. There's other examples of schar Shabbos, which is completely passive receiving of money on Shabbos. If I own a online business, if I own a machine, what they call the machines that give out drinks, and a slot machine that gives out drinks and sells, and I leave it running. If I have a website that's running on Shabbos automatically, and it just people log in and buy orders, and even if I'm just renting a property or I have money sitting in the bank account, all these are cases where potentially there's a problem of schar Shabbos. I'm not saying any of these cases are problematic, otherwise one couldn't work as a Rav or a Chazan, and one couldn't have an online business where the website stays open on Shabbos. But we need to discuss what the parameters are of what allows these things to take place, and Mi'at Hashem, that will be the topic for next week. So again, this is a continuation of Kotev. The whole world of commercial transaction, fascinatingly, falls under the Melacha of Kotev. So I'll stop there, and if there are any questions, please feel free to ask them. And otherwise, I'll wish everyone a good evening.
Thank you very much. Really interesting.